What would you do if you discovered that the homeless blind musician everyone ignored possessed musical abilities so extraordinary they could resurrect a dying symphony orchestra? Marcus Williams had been playing piano on Chicago's streets for 2 years, surviving on donations from people who saw only his disability. None of them realized that his perfect pitch and photographic musical memory held the key to saving one of America's most prestigious cultural institutions. Before we get to this wonderful story, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Now, let's get back to the story. Marcus had been blind since birth, but his world was far from dark. Every sound created colors in his mind. The rumble of Chicago's L train painted deep purples, car horns burst in sharp yellows, and human voices bloomed in countless hues across his consciousness. But nothing compared to the symphony of colors that music created. When he played piano, his world exploded in brilliant aurora that sighted people could never imagine. He discovered his gift at age 4 when his foster mother, overwhelmed by caring for a blind child, had placed him in front of an old keyboard to keep him occupied. Within hours, Marcus was playing back every melody he'd ever heard on television, radio, or overheard in passing conversations. By age 7, he could play complex classical pieces after hearing them just once. By 10, he was composing original works that music teachers called impossible for a child to create. But foster care had been a revolving door of families who couldn't handle a blind child with extraordinary needs. Some had tried to exploit his musical gifts for money. Others had simply given up when the challenges became too overwhelming. By 17, Marcus had aged out of the system with nothing but his musical ability and a determination to survive on his own terms. Chicago's streets had become his conservatory. He'd found an abandoned upright piano in an alley behind a demolished music store, somehow managed to get it to his corner spot on Michigan Avenue, and turned the sidewalk outside Symphony Center into his personal concert venue. The location wasn't coincidental. The acoustics of the building allowed him to hear fragments of the orchestra's rehearsals, and what he heard concerned him deeply. The Chicago Symphony Orchestra was in crisis, though few people understood the extent of their problems. Attendance had dropped 40% over the past 3 years. Critics were writing devastating reviews, calling their performances lackluster and technically proficient but emotionally vacant. Major donors were withdrawing support, and rumors circulated that the orchestra might be forced to declare bankruptcy for the first time in its 130-year history. Marcus heard all of this in ways others couldn't. His perfect pitch allowed him to detect minute intonation problems that even trained musicians missed. His extraordinary musical memory meant he could compare current performances to recordings from the orchestra's golden years and identify exactly what had changed. And his acute hearing meant he caught conversations through windows, overheard phone calls, and absorbed the mounting desperation in the voices of musicians who feared for their careers. "Something's wrong with their tuning system," Marcus had confided to Father Miguel Santos, the elderly priest who ran the nearby soup kitchen where Marcus got his meals. "The whole orchestra is slightly flat, but they're adjusting to compensate in ways that create harmonic discord." Father Santos nodded politely, though he had no musical training to understand what Marcus meant. "Perhaps you should tell someone at the symphony." Marcus had laughed bitterly. "They'd never listen to a homeless blind kid. I'm just street entertainment to them." But Marcus continued listening, continued analyzing, and continued playing his piano on the corner where Symphony Center's board members passed him daily without a second glance. He watched, or rather heard, as the orchestra's problems deepened. Musicians were leaving for other ensembles. Conductors were declining to renew contracts. The institution that had once been Chicago's crown jewel was crumbling. The crisis reached its peak on a cold Tuesday morning in November, when Marcus overheard a heated conversation between board members outside the Symphony Hall. "We're hemorrhaging money, Vivian," a man's voice said sharply. "If we can't turn this around by the end of the season, we'll have to seriously consider dissolution." "Don't be dramatic, Richard," replied a woman with crisp, authoritative tones. "The Chicago Symphony has survived worse challenges." "Not like this," the man countered. "Our last 3 recordings have been critical disasters. The Steinberg Foundation pulled their $5 million pledge after last week's performance. Face the facts. We're failing. because we can't figure out why our musicians can't perform at the level they once did. Marcus's fingers stilled on his piano keys. He knew exactly why the orchestra was failing, could hear the specific technical problems that were destroying their sound. But these people walked past him every day as if he were invisible, their conversations revealing their desperation while ignoring the solution sitting 20 feet away. The woman, Vivian, Marcus gathered, was speaking again. We need fresh perspective. Maybe it's time to bring in outside consultants, acoustic engineers, someone who can identify what we're missing. That'll cost another fortune we don't have, Richard replied glumly. As their footsteps faded, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He wouldn't wait to be noticed or acknowledged. If the Chicago Symphony Orchestra needed help, he would find a way to offer it, regardless of whether they initially wanted to listen. That evening, Marcus carefully composed a letter using a braille writer he'd salvaged from a dumpster behind a school for the blind. He wrote with the precision that his musical training had instilled in him, explaining the specific technical problems he'd identified and offering detailed solutions. He signed it simply, "A concerned musician who wants to help." The next morning, he asked Father Santos to deliver the letter to Symphony Center's main office. "Tell them it's from someone who's been studying their acoustic problems," Marcus instructed. "Don't mention that it's from me unless they ask directly." Father Santos, long accustomed to Marcus's unusual requests, agreed to serve as messenger. What happened next surprised them both. Within 3 hours, Father Santos returned with Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the orchestra's principal conductor, and James Chen, their master acoustician. Both looked skeptical, but desperate enough to investigate any potential solution. "Father Santos says you have insights about our performance problems," Dr. Harper said, her voice carrying the strain of someone under enormous pressure. "I have to admit, we're willing to consider any reasonable suggestions at this point." Marcus nodded from his position at the piano. "You're dealing with multiple issues that are compounding each other. Your primary problem is that your concert hall's humidity control system is affecting the wood instruments differently than it used to. The fluctuations are causing minute but consistent pitch variations that force your musicians to constantly adjust, which destroys their ensemble precision." James Chen's eyebrows rose sharply. "How could you possibly know about our humidity control system?" "I can hear it," Marcus replied simply. "Sound carries differently when atmospheric conditions change. Your hall used to maintain 45% humidity consistently, but now it fluctuates between 38% and 52% during performances. That's enough variation to affect intonation across your entire string section." Dr. Harper and James exchanged glances. Marcus's assessment was technically sophisticated beyond what they'd expect from a street musician. "Even if that's true," Dr. Harper said carefully, "humidity control is just one factor. Our reviews have mentioned overall ensemble problems, emotional disconnection, lack of musical cohesion. Basperhort. Because your musicians are working so hard to compensate for the tuning instabilities that they can't focus on musical expression," Marcus interrupted. "When you're constantly micro-adjusting pitch, you can't achieve the unified sound that creates emotional impact. Plus, your principal oboist has developed a slight tremor in her left hand, probably from stress, that's affecting the tuning reference for the entire orchestra." The silence that followed was profound. James Chen finally spoke. "How do you know about Patricia's tremor?" "That's not something anyone outside the orchestra would notice." "I hear everything," Marcus said quietly. "I've been listening to your rehearsals through these walls for 2 years. I know each musician's individual sound signature. I can detect when someone's having technical problems, and I can hear how those individual issues affect the ensemble as a whole." Dr. Harper studied Marcus with new intensity. "You've been analyzing our performances for 2 years?" "I've been trying to understand why an orchestra with such talented musicians sounds so disconnected," Marcus replied, "and I think I know how to fix it." What followed was the most unusual consulting session in Chicago Symphony Orchestra history. Marcus, still seated at his street piano, walked Dr. Harper and James Chen through a comprehensive analysis of their performance problems. He demonstrated pitch relationships by playing examples on his piano, explained acoustic principles with the clarity of someone who experienced sound as a multidimensional phenomenon, and offered solutions that addressed both technical and artistic issues. Your concert hall needs acoustic dampening panels installed on the east wall to eliminate a resonance that's creating false harmonics, Marcus explained, playing chord progressions that illustrated the problem. Your string section needs to retune their instruments using A442 instead of A440 to compensate for the temperature differential between backstage and the performance area. And your conductor needs to adjust the tempo markings in your Brahms repertoire by approximately 3% to account for the hall's changed reverberation characteristics. James Chen was frantically taking notes, his expression shifting from skepticism to amazement. This is incredibly detailed analysis. Where did you learn acoustical engineering? I didn't learn it, Marcus replied. I hear it. When you can't see, you develop other ways of understanding the world. Music isn't just sound to me. It's architecture, mathematics, physics, emotion, all combined into something I can perceive completely. Dr. Harper had been listening intently, occasionally asking Marcus to clarify technical points. Finally, she spoke. If you're right about these solutions, you could save our orchestra. But I have to ask, why haven't you approached us before now? Marcus's expression grew sad. Because people see a homeless blind kid and assume I couldn't possibly understand something as sophisticated as orchestral performance. I'm invisible to most people unless they want to drop $1 in my case. The truth of his words hung heavily in the air between them. Dr. Harper realized with uncomfortable clarity how many times she'd walked past Marcus without really seeing him, despite his obvious musical ability. That changes now, she said firmly. James, I want you to test Marcus's recommendations immediately. If even half of what he's suggesting is accurate, we need to implement these changes before our next performance. Over the following week, the Chicago Symphony Orchestra underwent the most comprehensive technical overhaul in its history. Humidity control systems were recalibrated, acoustic panels were installed, and instruments were retuned according to Marcus's specifications. But the most significant change was Marcus himself being invited into the rehearsal process. I've never worked with someone who could identify problems just by listening, Dr. Harper admitted, as she watched Marcus provide real-time feedback during a rehearsal. You're hearing things that our most sophisticated equipment doesn't detect. Marcus, now sitting in the concert hall instead of on the sidewalk outside, smiled as he listened to the orchestra's sound beginning to coalesce in ways it hadn't for years. Equipment measures what it's designed to measure, he replied, but music is more than just frequencies and decibel levels. It's about how all the elements work together to create something greater than the sum of its parts. The transformation was remarkable. Musicians who had been struggling to play together for months suddenly found themselves achieving the unified sound that had once made the Chicago Symphony Orchestra world-renowned. The technical adjustments Marcus had recommended eliminated the pitch instabilities that had been forcing constant compensation. But more importantly, his insights into the emotional and artistic aspects of their performance helped them reconnect with the musical passion that had been lost amid their technical struggles. It's like someone tuned not just our instruments, but our entire ensemble, said Patricia Morrison, the principal oboist, whose tremor had disappeared once the tuning stress was eliminated. I haven't felt this connected to the music in years. The board's reaction was equally profound. Richard Steinberg, the financial committee chairman who had been preparing for bankruptcy discussions, watched in amazement as their next performance received a standing ovation for the first time in 18 months. We have subscription renewals coming in faster than we've seen in 3 years, reported development director Susan Walsh. Critics are calling it a miraculous artistic renaissance. The Steinberg Foundation wants to double their previous pledge. But the most significant change was in how the orchestra viewed Marcus himself. The homeless street musician, who had been invisible to them for 2 years, was now recognized as the person who had saved their institution. I want to offer you a position, Doctor, Harper told Marcus after their first successful concert. We need someone with your abilities working with us permanently. Marcus hesitated. I'm not formally trained. I don't have any credentials or degrees. You have something more valuable, Dr. Harper replied. You have a gift that can't be taught in any conservatory. You hear music the way it's meant to be heard, as a complete living entity rather than just technical components. The Chicago Symphony Orchestra created a new position for Marcus, musical systems analyst. His job was to listen, to identify problems others couldn't detect, and to provide the unique perspective that only his extraordinary abilities could offer. But more than that, he became a bridge between the technical and artistic aspects of orchestral performance. 6 months later, the Chicago Symphony Orchestra was not only financially stable, but had regained its position as one of America's premier ensembles. Critics praised their renewed artistic vitality and unprecedented musical cohesion. They received invitations to perform at Carnegie Hall, Lincoln Center, and concert venues across Europe. Marcus, now living in a comfortable apartment near Symphony Center, still played piano, but now it was in the orchestra's rehearsal rooms and concert halls rather than on street corners. His perfect pitch and musical memory had become legendary among musicians, but his greatest contribution was teaching others to listen more deeply. Marcus has shown us that musical excellence isn't just about technical proficiency, Dr. Harper explained to a reporter from the Chicago Tribune. It's about understanding how every element contributes to the whole and having the sensitivity to hear what needs to be adjusted to achieve perfection. The story of the blind pianist who saved the Chicago Symphony Orchestra spread throughout the classical music world. Other orchestras began consulting Marcus when they faced their own performance challenges. Music schools invited him to lecture on acoustic perception and ensemble dynamics. But Marcus remained most passionate about working with young musicians who, like him, didn't fit traditional molds. Music doesn't care about your background, your disabilities, or whether you learned in a conservatory or on the streets, Marcus told a group of students at the Chicago Youth Symphony. It only cares about whether you're willing to listen deeply enough to hear its truth. Father Santos still visited Marcus regularly, marveling at the transformation in his young friend's life. You went from surviving on street corners to saving one of Chicago's most important cultural institutions, he observed during one of their conversations. I was always doing the same thing, Marcus replied thoughtfully. I was listening to music and trying to understand how to make it better. The only thing that changed was that people finally started listening to me. The upright piano that had been Marcus's home on Michigan Avenue was now displayed in the Symphony Center lobby with a plaque reading, "In recognition of Marcus Williams, whose extraordinary gift reminds us that genius can appear in unexpected places and that the most profound insights often come from those who see the world differently." Marcus's story became a reminder that talent and wisdom aren't always found where people expect to look. His perfect pitch and musical memory had literally saved the Chicago Symphony Orchestra from destruction, but his greater gift was showing an entire cultural community that brilliance could emerge from the margins of society. The blind teenager who had once played for spare change on sidewalks was now helping one of America's greatest orchestras achieve new heights of musical excellence. His journey from homeless street musician to celebrated acoustic genius proved that extraordinary abilities, when finally recognized and nurtured, could transform not just individual lives, but entire institutions. And late at night, when Symphony Center was empty and quiet, Marcus would sometimes sit at the concert grand piano on stage, playing melodies that painted colors across his mind. Brilliant, beautiful colors that he shared with a world that had finally learned to see his gift. Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.